All right, our first organ that we're going to talk about is the thyroid gland. And the way that I've drawn this here with these circles is to highlight the fact that the thyroid gland actually consists of lots of little spherical clusters of cells. And if we were to take a slice through this and look at it under the microscope, this is what it would look like in cross-section. So each of these are called follicles. So these are called follicular cells, which line the follicles. And then on the inside of the follicle, each follicle has something called colloid. And colloid is where we're going to find everything that we need to make thyroid hormone is stored within the colloid. So let's look at the connection between how we communicate between the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and thyroid gland itself. And this is going to be a similar pattern that we're going to see with the adrenal gland, which we'll talk about next lecture. So first we have the hypothalamus releasing its hormone, and it's called thyroid releasing hormone, or abbreviated TRH. This is put into the hypothalamic pituitary portal system and then will bind to cells in the anterior pituitary which have the appropriate receptor. The cells in the anterior pituitary will then release its hormone, and it's called TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone, as depicted by these green triangles, will then bind to the receptor on the thyroid, and that will then bring about changes within the thyroid gland that will create the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Now, one of the key things to learn in this endocrine section is feedback mechanisms. And so this is depicting that T3 and T4 will feed back and inhibit TSH and TRH. Now, in reality, TSH will also feed back and inhibit TRH, but we'll see clinically that one of the more important feedback mechanisms is this last hormone feeding back to inhibit the pituitary hormone. So TSH increases the synthesis of T3 and T4, and TSH is something that we call a trophic hormone. So by stimulating these cells, it actually brings about growth of these cells, or has the potential to bring about growth. And that's going to be very important clinically, because if we have things that are stimulating these TSH receptors, it will cause enlargement of the thyroid gland. So focusing back on TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, we mentioned that it increases the synthesis of T3, T4. Now, one of the interesting things about the thyroid gland is it's the only gland in the body that uses iodide. So TSH is going to stimulate iodide transport into colloid. And in colloid, we then see activity of this enzyme called thyroid peroxidase, which converts iodide to iodine. We're then going to use this iodine to form our thyroid hormones. So T3 and T4 are the hormones that are going to be created with this iodine which is present. T3 and T4 is going to be created by the substances which are stored in the colloid. And as we mentioned, TSH previously is a trophic hormone, so as it brings about these changes and produces T3 and T4, that's going to result in, if we have an excess of that, in enlargement of these cells. Now, an enlarged thyroid gland is called a goiter. Now, also, I think this is an appropriate time to indicate what T3 and T4 stand for. T3 stands for triiodothyronine, and T4 stands for tetraiodothyronine. Now, there are some differences as far as their potency, but for this class, we'll simply refer to them as a group as our thyroid hormones. So what are the effects of thyroid hormones? Well, one of the things that it does is it promotes normal development and function of the nervous system. And this is important because if we don't have normal thyroid hormone present during development, then that results in a condition called cretinism. That was the old term. Now it's simply probably called congenital hypothyroidism. But that's going to be one of the hormones that's checked for before a baby is discharged from the hospital because of its importance of neural development. It also has an effect on GI motility. Now, it's interesting that many of the effects that we see brought about are brought about by thyroid's effects on the sodium-potassium pump. So by increasing activity of the sodium-potassium pump, because that is a primary active transporter, that requires the production of ATP. So thyroid hormone, by increasing the activity of these pumps, results in a necessary increase in the metabolic rate to produce ATP. So that's referred to as a calorogenic effect. Thyroid hormone increases the number of beta-adrenergic receptors on the heart, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue. So at the heart, this is going to result in an increase in heart rate through the actions of the beta receptors on the SA and the AV node, and it's going to also increase in contractility. The beta receptors on the skeletal muscle, and this is a effect which is going to bring about an increase in protein breakdown. So many of the metabolic effects that we see throughout our body are brought about by actions on beta receptors. We haven't covered or mentioned this previously, but on the skeletal muscle, it's going to cause increased breakdown of protein, and on the adipose tissue, it's going to cause an increase in breakdown of fat, or lipolysis.